In the quiet, tree-lined streets of Willow Creek, two boys were born into lives as different as night and day. Johnny Hartford, with his golden hair and clear blue eyes, grew up in a sprawling white mansion at the top of the hill. His father, a successful entrepreneur, had made a fortune in real estate, and his mother was the queen of every charity ball, garden party, and fundraiser in town. Their life was a picture-perfect postcard of wealth and privilege, and Johnny never wanted for anything. His room was filled with the latest toys, gadgets, and every luxury a boy could dream of. But there was something missing from the polished floors and grand halls of his home, a sense of warmth and connection. Down the hill, in the older part of town, lived Marcus Daniels. Marcus was a quiet, intelligent black boy with deep brown eyes that shone with curiosity. His mother worked as a cleaner in the richer homes across town, while his father, when he was around, took odd jobs wherever he could find them. The Daniels home was modest, the paint peeling off the sides and the roof barely holding through the rains, but inside it was filled with love. His mother always had a smile for him despite her exhaustion, and there was a warmth in their small kitchen that no mansion could replicate. They didn't have much, but they had each other. The paths of these two boys might never have crossed if it weren't for a chance meeting on their first day of elementary school. Johnny had been excited but nervous, feeling out of place among so many children who came from different walks of life. Marcus, smaller than the other boys, was shy, clutching the too large backpack that his mother had bought secondhand. They ended up sitting next to each other in class, and when Johnny, fumbling with his new supplies, accidentally knocked over his entire pencil case, Marcus was the first to help him pick them up. That simple act of kindness was the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Over time, Johnny and Marcus became inseparable. While they were different in so many ways, they shared a bond that transcended their backgrounds. Johnny was the more playful of the two, always coming up with adventures and games, while Marcus was the thinker, always curious and eager to learn. Johnny struggled in school, especially in subjects like math and science, where Marcus excelled. In return for Marcus's help with homework, Johnny would share the lunches his mother packed, giving Marcus the extra sandwich or juice box his family couldn't afford. It was a friendship built on quiet, unspoken acts of generosity. By the time they reached high school, they were closer than brothers. Every afternoon, they would head to Johnny's house to work on homework together. Johnny's parents tolerated Marcus at first, assuming it was just a childhood phase. But as the years passed, their tolerance turned to disapproval. It wasn't just about Marcus's background, though that played a part. The Hartfords had grand ambitions for their son, and they couldn't understand why he would want to spend time with someone from the other side of town. The tension began quietly, with disapproving glances and terse words spoken behind closed doors. But as Johnny and Marcus grew older, the disapproval became harder to ignore. Johnny's mother would make pointed remarks when Marcus came over, asking Johnny why he didn't spend more time with boys from better families. His father, too, would pull him aside, his voice low and authoritative. "You need to think about your future, Johnny," his father would say. "You're going to inherit a lot of responsibility one day, and the people you surround yourself with reflect on you. This Marcus, he's a good kid, but he's not someone you should be spending all your time with." Johnny hated these conversations. He loved his parents, but they didn't understand Marcus. Marcus wasn't just some kid from a poor family. He was the smartest person Johnny knew. He was loyal, kind, and had helped him through so many tough times. Johnny had always struggled in school, and without Marcus's help, he might have failed more than once. But it wasn't just about academics. When Johnny's father was too busy working and his mother too consumed with her social life, it was Marcus who listened, Marcus who was always there. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where his parents had made their disdain for Marcus painfully clear, Johnny stormed out of the house and rode his bike to Marcus's. As he pedaled through the quiet streets, his heart pounded with a mix of frustration and fear. What if his parents forced him to stop seeing Marcus? What if their friendship couldn't survive the pressures coming from all sides? When he reached Marcus's house, he found Marcus sitting on the porch, reading under the dim light of the front door. The house looked as worn as ever, but there was a peace about it that always made Johnny feel at home. He slumped down next to Marcus, who immediately sensed that something was wrong. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, closing his book. "It's my parents. They don't want me to hang out with you anymore." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his face serious but calm. "I figured they'd feel that way eventually." Johnny turned to him, a mix of desperation and anger in his eyes. "It's not fair, Marcus. They don't know you like I do. They don't see how smart you are, how much you've helped me. They just see where you're from." Marcus shrugged, though there was sadness in his eyes. "That's the way the world is, Johnny. People make up their minds about you before they even know you. But it doesn't have to be like that," Johnny said, his voice cracking. "I won't let them ruin this. I don't care what they say." For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he smiled, a small, sad smile. "I appreciate that, Johnny. But you have to live your life too. Don't throw away your future just to prove a point." Johnny shook his head. "You are my future, Marcus. You've been there for me when no one else has. I don't care about what they think." And so, despite his parents' growing objections, Johnny continued to spend as much time with Marcus as possible. But the tension at home was palpable. His father's patience was wearing thin, and his mother became more distant, constantly reminding Johnny of the opportunities he was squandering by hanging around with the wrong people. Finally, one day his father snapped. After another round of complaints from their neighbors about Johnny's poor choice of friends, his father announced that they were moving to a different state. The excuse was business, but Johnny knew it was about Marcus. They were leaving, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The day Johnny left town was the hardest day of his life. He didn't even know how to say goodbye to Marcus, so they just sat together in silence for hours, knowing that their lives were about to take very different paths. As Johnny's family drove away, leaving Willow Creek behind, Marcus stood at the edge of the road, watching his best friend disappear. He promised himself he would make something of his life, if only to honor the friendship that had meant so much to him. While Johnny's life spiraled downward after the move, Marcus's path took him upward. He graduated high school at the top of his class and earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university. He studied relentlessly, determined to make the most of every opportunity that came his way. His intelligence and work ethic quickly caught the attention of investors, and by the time he graduated, Marcus had started a small tech company. His business grew rapidly, and within a few years, he was a successful entrepreneur, making millions and giving back to his community in every way he could. But Johnny wasn't so lucky. At his new school, far away from the only friend who had ever truly understood him, Johnny fell in with the wrong crowd. He started skipping classes, hanging out with kids who introduced him to drugs and a lifestyle of reckless abandon. His grades plummeted, and by the time graduation came, Johnny barely scraped by. College wasn't an option, and with his parents growing frustrated and disappointed in him, he felt more lost than ever. After his parents passed away in a car accident, Johnny was left with their estate, but with no direction and no one to guide him. He quickly fell into a spiral of bad decisions. He sold off properties to pay for his growing addiction, and before long, everything his parents had built was gone. The mansion, the money, the cars, it all disappeared, and Johnny found himself on the streets, homeless and alone. Years passed. Johnny drifted from place to place, surviving on whatever scraps he could find. Winter was approaching, and each night grew colder. His once bright blue eyes were now dull and tired, his body worn from the harshness of life on the streets. Meanwhile, Marcus's success had only grown. He had built a reputation not just as a brilliant businessman, but as a philanthropist, someone who believed in second chances and helping those in need. He had opened shelters for the homeless, funded educational programs for underprivileged youth, and was always looking for ways to give back. One bitter winter, as Marcus expanded his philanthropic efforts to his wife's hometown, he found himself visiting a new homeless shelter they had recently opened. The shelter was crowded, filled with people who had nowhere else to go as the temperature dropped below freezing. Marcus walked through the rows of cots, checking on the men and women who had come in from the cold. And then, in the corner of the room, he saw a familiar face in the dim light of the shelter. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He stood still for a moment, unable to believe what he was seeing. Huddled in a corner, wrapped in a tattered blanket, sat Johnny. His once neat blonde hair was long and unkempt, and his face, once full of life, was gaunt and pale. Johnny was staring blankly at the floor, oblivious to the world around him, unaware that his past was standing just a few feet away. Marcus's chest tightened as a flood of memories surged through him. Memories of long afternoons spent studying together, of laughter, of quiet moments when words weren't necessary because their friendship spoke for itself. His mind raced, thinking of all the times Johnny had been there for him when he had nothing. And now here Johnny was, having lost everything, looking like a shell of the boy Marcus once knew. For a moment, Marcus felt frozen, not knowing how to approach his old friend after all these years. What could he say? How had life led Johnny here, to this dark place, when once they had both had so much potential? But Marcus knew there was no time for hesitation. He couldn't just stand there and watch his best friend suffer. With a deep breath, he walked over to Johnny's cot and knelt beside him, his voice soft but filled with emotion. Johnny? The name hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed as if Johnny hadn't heard him. But slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes, hollow and weary, met Marcus's, and for a second, there was no recognition. Johnny blinked, confused, his brow furrowed, but then a spark flickered behind his eyes. Faint, but unmistakable. Marcus? Johnny's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. He stared at Marcus as if trying to convince himself that it was really him. Is that you? Marcus nodded, tears welling in his eyes. He reached out, placing a hand on Johnny's shoulder. Yeah, Johnny. It's me. Johnny's breath hitched, and his face crumpled as he looked away, shame washing over him. He couldn't meet Marcus's gaze, couldn't bear for his old friend to see what had become of him. I'm sorry, Johnny whispered, his voice barely audible. I messed everything up. Marcus's heart broke at the words. He shook his head, refusing to let Johnny drown in guilt. You don't have to apologize, Marcus said, his voice firm but gentle. You don't have to say anything. But Johnny couldn't stop. It was as if the dam holding back all his pain and regret had finally broken. I lost it all, Marcus, he said, tears streaming down his face. My parents, the estate, everything. I made stupid decisions. I wasn't strong like you. I couldn't handle it. Marcus sat down next to him, his voice filled with quiet compassion. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. Johnny shook his head, wiping at his tears with a trembling hand. You shouldn't be here, Marcus. You don't owe me anything. Look at me. I don't deserve your help. Marcus swallowed hard, his own tears threatening to spill over. He remembered every act of kindness Johnny had shown him, all the ways he had been there when Marcus had been struggling. Johnny had never looked down on him, never judged him for his circumstances. Marcus had never forgotten the sandwiches, the supplies, the quiet generosity that Johnny had offered without ever asking for anything in return. And now, Johnny was the one who needed help. You were always there for me, Johnny, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. When I had nothing, you gave me food, school supplies, you even gave me money to help my family when we didn't have enough. You never treated me like I was less than you. You were my friend, my brother. Johnny looked at Marcus, his eyes wide with disbelief. But I failed you, he said, his voice cracking. I couldn't even get my own life together. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying his voice. Life doesn't always go the way we plan. We all make mistakes. But that doesn't change who you are. You're still the person who stood by me when no one else did. And I'm not about to let you go through this alone. Johnny's shoulders shook as he cried, overwhelmed by the weight of his mistakes and the kindness Marcus was showing him. It had been so long since anyone had treated him with compassion. For years, he had wandered the streets, invisible to the world, and now, here was Marcus, the one person he thought he'd never see again, offering him a lifeline. Marcus stayed with Johnny that night, listening as Johnny slowly began to open up about everything that had happened, the bad decisions, the people he had fallen in with, the downward spiral that had led him to lose everything. Marcus listened without judgment, his heart aching for his friend, but also filled with determination. He wasn't going to let Johnny stay in this dark place. The next morning, Marcus made arrangements for Johnny to move into one of the houses he owned through his charitable organization. It was a modest but comfortable home, a place where Johnny could rebuild his life. When Marcus handed him the keys, Johnny stared at them in disbelief, his hands trembling. "I don't know what to say," Johnny whispered. "I don't deserve this." Marcus smiled, shaking his head. "You don't have to say anything. Just take it one day at a time. We'll get through this together." But Marcus didn't stop there. He knew Johnny needed more than just a roof over his head. He needed a purpose, something to help him regain his confidence and sense of self-worth. Marcus offered Johnny a job at his company, starting as a supervisor, knowing that Johnny had the potential to excel if given the chance. It wasn't about pity or charity. Marcus knew that deep down, Johnny was capable of great things. At first, Johnny was hesitant. The years of failure and disappointment had left him doubting himself. But Marcus believed in him, and slowly, that belief began to rekindle something in Johnny that he had thought was long lost. Weeks passed, and under Marcus's mentorship, Johnny began to thrive. He worked hard, learning the ropes of the business and regaining a sense of pride in himself. It wasn't easy. There were still hard days, moments when the past felt too heavy. But with Marcus by his side, Johnny found the strength to keep going. One evening, after a long day at work, Marcus and Johnny sat together on the porch of Johnny's new home, watching the sun set over the horizon. For the first time in a long time, there was peace between them, an unspoken understanding that they had both walked difficult paths but had found their way back to each other. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," Johnny said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. Marcus smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "You don't have to repay me, Johnny. This isn't about that. We've been there for each other when it mattered most. That's what friends do." Johnny looked at Marcus, his heart full. "You saved my life, Marcus." Marcus shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "No, Johnny. We saved each other." And as the night settled in around them, there was a sense of closure, but also a new beginning. A future filled with hope, where two boys who had once been separated by life's harshest challenges had found their way back to each other, stronger than ever before. Their friendship, tested by time and circumstance, had endured, proving that no matter how far apart life might take them, the bond they shared could never be broken. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps us reach more people. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on all our future videos. We have exciting content coming your way, and we can't wait to share it with you. Thank you for your support, and let's continue building a positive community together. See you in the next video.